The cold arrived early that year. Streets were covered with light snow, and shops played the same Christmas songs again and again. At the local school, hallways were decorated with paper stars, green ribbons, and shiny ornaments taped to classroom doors. Teachers tried to create a warm holiday feeling, but not everyone felt that warmth. A black teenage girl walked through those halls every day with her head slightly down. She had transferred to this school a few months earlier, right before winter began. New places were never easy, and this one felt especially hard. She spoke softly, kept to herself, and rarely looked anyone in the eye. Not because she was weak, but because she had learned that staying quiet often helped her survive. She lived with her mother in a small apartment not far from the school. Money was tight, but love was not. Every morning, her mother made sure she was dressed neatly, her hair carefully done, and her backpack packed with care. Before leaving, her mother always reminded her to stay strong and kind, no matter how others acted. Those words stayed with her, even when the days felt heavy. At school, she noticed things most people ignored. She saw how friend groups formed quickly and how laughter often stopped when she walked by. Some students whispered, others stared too long. A few pretended she wasn't there at all. She tried not to let it bother her, telling herself that once Christmas break arrived, she could rest and start fresh in the new year. In one corner of the school, a small group of students watched her closely. They were known for causing trouble but rarely getting caught. Teachers saw them as playful or loud, not harmful. They joked loudly, mocked quietly, and enjoyed pushing limits. To them, the holiday season was just another excuse to have fun, no matter who got hurt. At first, their behavior toward her was subtle. A laugh when she passed by. A comment said just loud enough for her to hear. Someone moving her books when she wasn't looking. Nothing that could easily be reported, nothing that left clear proof. Each moment alone seemed small, but together they formed a pattern that followed her every day. She tried to ignore it. She focused on her classes and stayed busy during breaks, often sitting in the library or helping a teacher clean up decorations. She told herself that reacting would only make things worse. Still, every night before bed, she replayed moments from the day, wondering what she had done wrong to deserve this treatment. As Christmas drew closer, the school planned a holiday event. There would be music, small games, gift exchanges, and decorations in the main hall. Students were encouraged to participate, and teachers hoped it would bring everyone together. The girl was unsure if she wanted to attend, but a counselor gently suggested it might help her feel included. Wanting to believe things could improve, she agreed. The group of bullies saw the event as an opportunity. They joked among themselves, sharing ideas and laughing in low voices. To them, it was just a prank, something funny to talk about later. They convinced themselves it would be harmless and that no one would take it seriously. They did not think about how it might affect her or how deeply words and actions can cut. Meanwhile, she prepared quietly. She wore a simple sweater her mother had saved money to buy. It wasn't flashy, but it was clean and warm. She even smiled at herself in the mirror that morning, hoping the day would pass peacefully. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel excited, imagining a normal school event where she could blend in and not feel different. At school, the hall buzzed with energy. Lights blinked softly, and the smell of sweet treats filled the air. Students laughed and moved from table to table. For a short while, she felt almost invisible in a good way. No one stared. No one whispered. She stood near the edge of the room, watching others enjoy themselves. But eyes were on her. The group had already started setting things up, careful to avoid attention. They exchanged looks and quiet laughs, confident that everything was under control. In their minds, this was just another joke, another story to tell later. They had no idea that their plan would not end the way they expected. As the event continued, the girl sensed something was off. She noticed how often the same people glanced in her direction. She felt a tightness in her chest, a warning she had learned to trust. Still, she stayed where she was, telling herself not to assume the worst. She didn't want fear to control her life. In that moment, she thought about Christmas at home, about sitting with her mother, sharing simple food, and watching old movies together. Those thoughts gave her comfort. She reminded herself that no matter what happened, she was not alone in the world. What she didn't know was that this day would change everything. The quiet strength she had built over months was about to be tested. The choices others made, thinking they were just having fun, would soon bring consequences they never imagined. As the lights shimmered above and music played in the background, the first step of the prank moved into place. And with it, the calm before a storm quietly settled over the room. The room stayed loud and bright, but something unseen had shifted. The girl felt it in the way her shoulders tightened and her breath became shallow. She stood still near the wall, holding a paper cup with both hands, pretending to read the designs on it. She told herself to relax. Nothing bad had happened yet. Across the hall, the group stayed close together. They moved with purpose but acted casual, laughing when others passed by. One of them brushed past a table and nudged a box closer to the center of the room. Another whispered something and nodded toward the girl. Their confidence came from thinking they were smarter than everyone else. They believed they knew how far they could go without getting in trouble. The girl noticed a few students watching her with curious looks. She wondered if there was something on her clothes or in her hair. She checked quickly, smoothing her sweater, forcing a small smile. No one said anything. The music grew louder, and a teacher clapped to get attention, announcing the start of a small holiday game. Students gathered around. Some cheered. Others groaned. The girl hesitated, then stepped closer, not wanting to seem distant or rude. She stood near the back, hoping to blend into the crowd. The game involved choosing small wrapped items from a box, something simple meant to make people laugh. One of the students from the group stepped forward and said her name loudly, pretending to be friendly. The girl froze for half a second, surprised they knew her name at all. A few people turned to look. She felt heat rise in her face but slowly raised her hand. A teacher smiled and waved her forward, encouraging her to join. She walked to the front, every step feeling heavier than the last. The room seemed too quiet for a moment, even though music still played. She told herself it was fine. It was just a game. People were watching everyone, not just her. She reached into the box and felt around. Her fingers touched something oddly shaped. Before she could think twice, she pulled it out. A few students laughed. Others gasped softly. The item wasn't dangerous, but it was meant to embarrass. Cheap, childish, and placed there on purpose. The girl stood still. Her face went blank, not from shock, but from disappointment. She looked around and saw the familiar faces, the ones who had whispered and stared for weeks. Some were laughing openly now. Others avoided her eyes. She understood in that moment that this was not a mistake. The teacher's smile faded. Confusion spread across the room. A few adults stepped closer, asking what was going on. The girl didn't cry. She didn't shout. She calmly placed the item back into the box and took a step back. For a moment, no one spoke. Then someone from the group laughed loudly, trying to turn it into a joke. That laugh echoed in the room, sharp and careless. The girl felt a familiar urge to disappear, but something stopped her. Months of silence pressed against her chest, and she realized she was tired of carrying it alone. She spoke quietly at first, then a little louder. She said this wasn't funny. She said things like this had been happening for weeks. She didn't accuse wildly or raise her voice. She simply told the truth, one sentence at a time. She described the whispers, the moved books, the looks that made her feel small. The room changed. Students shifted uncomfortably. Teachers exchanged looks. A counselor stepped forward and gently asked her to continue. The girl's hands trembled, but she kept speaking. She explained how she tried to ignore it, how she didn't want trouble, how she just wanted to get through the school day like everyone else. Someone in the crowd pulled out a phone and quietly showed a teacher messages that had been shared earlier. Screens were turned. Faces went pale. What had been planned as a quick prank was now surrounded by proof and witnesses. The group realized too late that they were no longer in control. The smiles disappeared. One of them tried to explain, saying it was just a joke, that they didn't mean any harm. The words sounded weak in the heavy silence. The girl stopped talking. She felt drained, but also lighter. She had finally said what she had carried for so long. A teacher thanked her for speaking up and asked her to step aside for a moment. Another adult asked the group to remain where they were. Whispers spread, but this time they weren't about her. They were about consequences. Parents were mentioned. Offices were mentioned. The group stood still, their earlier confidence gone. They looked around, realizing how many people were watching. The girl moved to the side of the room and sat down. A teacher handed her a tissue and asked if she was okay. She nodded slowly. Her heart was still racing, but she felt a strange calm. She thought about her mother and how she would explain what happened. She hoped she wouldn't be disappointed. The holiday music was turned off. Decorations suddenly felt out of place. The event ended early, and students were asked to return to their classes. As people filed out, some glanced at the girl with new expressions. Not pity, but respect. The group was led in a different direction. They avoided looking back. What started as a Christmas trick had opened a door they couldn't close. As the hall emptied, the girl sat quietly, staring at the floor. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing had changed. She had used her voice. And once spoken, the truth could not be ignored. The rest of that day moved slowly, like time had thickened. The girl sat in a quiet room near the office while adults spoke in low voices outside. She could hear footsteps passing, doors opening and closing, and the hum of a heater trying to fight the cold. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers locked together, still shaking a little. A counselor sat across from her and spoke gently, asking if she needed water. The girl nodded. The counselor listened as she explained more, not rushed, not pushed. This time, the words came easier. She talked about how long it had been going on and how she tried to stay invisible so it would stop. The counselor didn't interrupt. She just listened, which made a difference. Later, her mother arrived. She looked worried at first, then relieved when she saw her daughter sitting upright and calm. They hugged tightly. No words were needed at that moment. The girl felt grounded again, like her feet were back on solid ground. Administrators asked to speak with them together. They explained what had happened during the event and what steps would follow. There would be a review of messages, interviews with students, and meetings with parents. They said the school took this seriously. The girl watched their faces carefully, searching for signs that this was just talk. But this time, the tone felt different. Word spread quickly through the school. By the next morning, everyone seemed to know something had gone wrong. The holiday decorations were still up, but the mood had changed. The group that caused the trouble was missing from class, called in for meetings. The halls felt quieter without their loud jokes. The girl returned to class, unsure how people would treat her now. She kept her eyes forward and took her seat. A few students glanced her way, then looked back at their books. One person leaned over and whispered that they were sorry for what happened. Another offered a small smile. These were small things, but they mattered. During lunch, she sat at the same table she always did. For the first time, someone asked if they could sit with her. She hesitated, then nodded. They talked about homework, about winter break plans, about nothing special. Felt normal, and that felt new. Behind closed doors, the investigation continued. Screenshots were reviewed. Stories were compared. It became clear that the prank was not a single moment but part of a pattern. Adults who had once brushed things off now saw the full picture. Mistakes were acknowledged. Meetings were held with the students involved and their families. The laughter and confidence from before were gone. Faces were serious. Excuses sounded thin when placed next to facts. Consequences were explained clearly, not as punishment alone, but as responsibility. The girl was not asked to face them directly. That choice was hers, and she chose distance. She needed space to breathe and think. At home, she and her mother talked late into the night. They spoke about fear, about strength, and about how silence can sometimes protect, but speaking can change things. As days passed, the girl noticed changes. Teachers checked in with her more often. The counselor invited her to a small support group. She was encouraged to speak when she felt uncomfortable, and she slowly believed that her words would be taken seriously. The school announced new steps to address bullying. There would be clearer reporting, more supervision during events, and open conversations in classrooms. Some students rolled their eyes, but many listened. The message was clear. What happened was not acceptable. For the girl, healing was not fast or perfect. Some mornings, she still felt that tightness in her chest. Some nights, she replayed the moment at the front of the room. But now, those memories were mixed with others. Like the counselor's calm voice, like her mother's steady presence, like the quiet respect she felt when she walked through the halls. One afternoon, as snow fell outside, she stayed after school to help take down decorations. She reached up to remove a paper star and paused. She thought about how close she had been to skipping that holiday event. How easily the story could have ended differently if she had stayed silent. A teacher thanked her for helping and said she admired her courage. The word courage lingered in the girl's mind. She had never thought of herself that way. She still didn't feel brave. But maybe bravery wasn't about feeling strong. Maybe it was about speaking even when your voice shakes. Winter break arrived. The school emptied, and the noise faded. At home, the girl and her mother decorated a small tree. They laughed over burned cookies and watched old movies wrapped in blankets. The girl felt lighter than she had in months. She knew the consequences for others were still unfolding, and she didn't take joy in that. What mattered more was the change she felt inside. She no longer felt invisible. She felt seen, heard, and supported. As the year came to an end, she looked ahead with cautious hope. She knew challenges would come again. Life rarely stays calm for long. But now she carried something new with her into the future. She carried the knowledge that her voice mattered, and that once used, it could shift an entire room. When school opened again after winter break, the air felt different. The cold was sharper, and the days were shorter, but something inside the building had shifted. The girl walked through the doors with her backpack resting firmly on her shoulders. She still felt nervous, but it was not the same fear as before. It was more like standing on new ground and testing whether it would hold. Teachers greeted students at the door. Some smiled at her in a way that felt genuine, not forced. She nodded back and kept moving. The halls were busy, yet quieter than before. The group that once filled the space with noise was no longer together. Some seats were empty. Others were filled by students who seemed suddenly careful with their words. In class, lessons picked up where they had left off. Math problems, reading assignments, small quizzes. Life went on, but the girl noticed how often adults checked the room, how often they paused to remind students about respect and boundaries. These reminders were not lectures. They were calm and steady, like rules meant to protect, not punish. During lunch, the girl no longer sat alone every day. Sometimes she chose quiet, needing time to think. Other times, she shared a table with classmates who talked about shows they liked or plans for the weekend. No one treated her like a symbol or a story. She was just another student, and that was enough. Behind the scenes, the school continued its work. Meetings were held. Reports were written. Clear decisions were made. Consequences were given in ways meant to teach, not shame. The girl did not hear every detail, and she didn't want to. What mattered was knowing that what happened was taken seriously. One afternoon, the counselor asked if the girl would like to help with a small discussion group for younger students. It would be optional, and she could say no. The idea scared her at first. Speaking in front of others still made her heart race. But she thought about how lost she had felt when she first arrived. After a long pause, she agreed. The group met in a small classroom after school. There were only a few students sitting in a loose circle. The counselor started the conversation, then invited the girl to share anything she felt comfortable saying. She took a breath and spoke slowly. She talked about feeling alone, about how silence can feel safe but also heavy. She didn't give details. She didn't need to. The younger students listened closely. Some nodded. One said they felt the same way sometimes. In that moment, the girl realized her story had power beyond her own experience. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. At home, things were calmer too. Her mother noticed the change right away. The girl laughed more. She slept better. They talked openly about school, not just the good days but the hard ones too. Her mother reminded her often that strength doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like getting up and trying again. Still, not everything was easy. There were moments when old memories crept back. A laugh in the hallway that sounded too familiar. A sudden silence when she entered a room. When that happened, she paused, breathed, and reminded herself of what she now knew. She was not imagining things. She was not alone. And she had the right to speak. One day, a teacher returned graded papers and quietly told her she was doing well. The words were simple, but they meant more than the teacher knew. The girl realized she had been holding herself back before, afraid to stand out in any way. Now, she allowed herself to take pride in her work. The school announced a spring event meant to bring students together. This time, planning included student voices. Clear rules were set. Support was visible. When the girl heard about it, she felt a brief wave of doubt. Then she surprised herself by signing up to help. Preparation days were busy. Posters were made. Tables were arranged. The girl worked alongside others, sharing scissors and tape, trading small jokes. No one stared. No one whispered. She felt present in a way she hadn't before. As the event approached, she thought back to the Christmas gathering. The contrast was sharp. That memory still hurt, but it no longer defined her. It was part of her story, not the whole thing. On the day of the event, the room filled with sound and color again. This time, the energy felt careful but warm. The girl moved through the space confidently, helping where needed. When someone thanked her, she smiled without hesitation. Later, as she stood near a window watching the sky darken, she felt something close to peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because she trusted herself more. She trusted that if something went wrong, she could handle it. The consequences of the prank had reached further than anyone expected. They changed how people paid attention. They changed how voices were heard. The girl didn't set out to cause that. She only wanted to survive. But sometimes survival leads to change. As she packed up to leave that evening, she thought about the months ahead. There would be challenges. There always were. But now she carried experience, support, and a quiet confidence she had earned. She stepped outside into the cold air, pulled her coat tighter, and walked forward, not looking down this time, but ahead. Time moved forward as it always does. The weeks after the spring event passed quietly, without drama or sudden changes. The girl settled into a rhythm that felt steady. She woke up early, helped her mother when she could, and walked to school with her head up. The small habits she built each day slowly turned into confidence. At school, people treated her with a kind of normal respect_attachment they hadn't before. Not special treatment, not awkward silence, just space, fairness, and simple kindness. That mattered more than apologies ever could. She learned that peace does not always come with noise. Sometimes it comes softly. She focused more on her studies and surprised herself with how much she enjoyed learning when fear no longer followed her into the classroom. She raised her hand sometimes. When she answered questions, her voice was calm. Even when she was wrong, she didn't feel ashamed. Mistakes no longer felt dangerous. The counselor continued checking in, not because something was wrong, but because support was now a routine, not a reaction. The girl appreciated that. It made her feel valued, not watched. They talked about goals, about college dreams, about life beyond the school walls. For the first time, the future felt wide instead of heavy. At home, her mother noticed changes too. The girl laughed more freely. She talked about her day without hesitation. Sometimes they sat together in the evenings, sharing tea and quiet moments. Those moments meant everything. They reminded her that strength is often built in small, loving spaces. One afternoon, a teacher asked the girl to help a new student find their classroom. The request was simple, but it stayed with her. Someone had trusted her. She walked the student down the hall, pointing out lockers and shortcuts, offering reassurance. She saw herself in that moment, not as someone broken, but as someone who could guide. As the end of the school year approached, discussions about summer plans filled the halls. Some students talked about trips. Others talked about jobs. The girl didn't have big plans, but she didn't feel left out. She was content with the idea of rest, of time to breathe and reset. The school year ended with a small assembly. Nothing fancy, just a gathering to reflect and move forward. The principal spoke about accountability, growth, and community. The words felt earned, not rehearsed. When applause filled the room, the girl joined in, feeling part of something larger. After the assembly, as students began to leave, a classmate stopped her and thanked her, not for causing change, but for being brave enough to speak. The girl nodded, unsure what to say. She didn't feel brave in the moment it mattered. She just felt tired of being silent. Still, she accepted the thanks quietly. On the last day of school, she walked out with sunlight on her face and a sense of closure in her chest. The building behind her held memories both painful and proud. She didn't need to forget the hard ones. They helped shape who she was becoming. Summer days passed slowly. The girl read books, helped around the house, and took long walks in the evening. She reflected on everything that had happened since Christmas. The prank that was meant to embarrass her had done the opposite. It revealed truths, forced accountability, and gave her back her voice. She understood now that consequences are not about revenge. They are about awareness, about learning how actions affect others. She didn't wish harm on anyone. She wished growth. That understanding made her feel older, wiser in a quiet way. As summer faded, thoughts of the new school year appeared. She felt nervous again, but it was a different kind of nervous. Came with hope. She knew she could handle challenges now. She had proof. Before the new term began, the girl and her mother visited the school to finalize paperwork. Walking through the halls again felt strange, but not frightening. She remembered who she was when she first arrived, and she honored that version of herself for surviving. On the first day back, she chose her seat without hesitation. She unpacked her bag and looked around the room calmly. When the teacher began speaking, she listened with focus. She was ready. The girl understood something important now. Life does not always change because people suddenly become kind. Sometimes it changes because someone refuses to accept mistreatment as normal. What started as a cruel Christmas trick became a turning point. Not just for her, but for those who witnessed it. The consequences reached far beyond that single moment. They reshaped awareness, responsibility, and respect. As she walked home that afternoon, the air cool and familiar, she felt proud. Not loud pride, quiet pride, the kind that stays with you. She knew there would always be people who try to tear others down. But she also knew something stronger now. Her voice mattered, and she would never give it away again.